This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The subject is pop culture, and this will be another of my shows featuring interesting websites and video channels. The man before you is Fred Smith. He runs a popular YouTube channel called Fredflix, and the conversation will begin when we return. Fred Smith is the man before you, and he runs a popular website, actually a YouTube channel called Fredflix. And I had discovered it a couple of years ago when he started. You started about 2.5 years ago, I think, and it was a typical site that listed things, popular shows, the best-looking women from the 60s and 70s. And then I noticed recently when I came across it again a few months back, you had started doing a series of personal videos about a day in the life in 1961 or 73 or something whatnot. So as I usually like to do, I want to give you a couple of minutes to just say who you are and what the purpose of your web channel is. So Fred, welcome, and a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm retired, single father. I'm 63 years old. I worked for a newspaper for 42 years, a long 42 years. And I always made videos. I had the first Betamax VCR, and I made videos for myself. And I like to edit, and I like to create. And so I made videos for decades, and just making my friends suffer having to watch them. And I said, well, wouldn't it be great if I could, maybe share this stuff? And YouTube, I was just watching YouTube one day, and I looked up, and it had a little upload button. I said, So a lot of trying to figure out how to get the upload to work. And once I did that, I said, and I started getting views, and I started getting comments, and I said, wow, I can share my stuff. And so I started just doing a few videos, and I had an earlier version of Fredflix. It was a lot simpler and just a random thing, and I realized that I was building an audience. And then YouTube, I didn't understand YouTube's policies about copyright content and about community guidelines. If you show a little bit of women's cleavage or whatever, get a little too low, they strike you. And so the channel was removed. So a couple of weeks later, I learned from that experience. I came back with a new type of Fredflix, where I understood more what audiences want and and I always made videos for me first, what I wanted to see. And I'm a baby boomer, so I make videos about the 60s, mid-50s to mid-70s. I made it for what I want to see, and if people like that, that's fine. And it turns out some did. So when I came back with the new Fredflix, I got a better at the video editing programs and software, and I got to where I could get kind of semi-professional at it, and I understood who I was playing for, but I still continue to use copyrighted material as long as they allow it, and as long as I don't try to, like, I'm not going to say, here is a Jackie Gleason show, because that would be removed immediately, because they're onto that. So I have to just do bits and pieces and just use some music that's not public domain, but I don't advertise that I use that music. I might leave my video with a little bit of a song, but I don't try to advertise it.
Well, let's continue. Before we go talking just biographically who you are and where you came from, let's just talk a bit about the website and rather the channel and how you make the videos. What kind of video editing system do you use?
Right now, I just use originally just used the Windows that came with it. I forgot what it was. It was Windows Media. And it was simple. And so my computer crashed, and Windows 10 doesn't make that software anymore. So I had to get myself a new, the company is called Windows Movie Maker. But I use OneShare Filmora. And it's not that expensive, and it's pretty good, and I'm still trying to learn the ins and outs of it, but that's what I use now.
So when you do a typical video, let's say if you did a 5 or 6 minute video about 1960s science fiction shows like Lost in Space, Star Trek, The Time Tunnel, that kind of thing, where do you get these clips? Do you find them on, do you just Google, oh, Star Trek?
personally have probably 7,000 TV shows that I collect from the 50s to the 70s alone.
Okay.
And I have over 1,000 movies. So I have commercials that I've collected videos since time began. That's what I do. And if I don't have it, I go to YouTube and I pick it up from there if I have to. I don't mind.
Yeah.
But you can't even use it. If I try to put on a Lost in Space clip longer than 1 minute, it gets pulled. I have to be careful of that.
Yeah, I know. When I first started doing this interview series, I think I was trying to do a film noir show, and they have on YouTube film noirs that are public domain. And there was a film noir, though, that a claim was made in Germany by some goddamn company, and they gave me a strike. And I'm like, it is on YouTube. I got it from YouTube. It says public domain. How the hell can you give me a strike? And it took. And so that's why I actually have two YouTube channels myself, Cosmoetica and E-Cosmoetica, because for about X amount, 6 months, I couldn't upload anything more than 15 minutes. So for doing these interviews, it was a pain in the ass. So I had to make a second channel. How many times have you gotten like these bizarre companies or these claimants that have...
A lot. And, it's not consistent. Like you say, I got it from YouTube. Why did you not strike the other guy? Why did you not take it off then? Why are you taking it off from me? I sometimes feel like I'm targeted. Yeah. Or either someone's reporting it, I don't know. But it is not consistent. So you never know. Yeah. And luckily, though, you can, as you know, you can go through and see what it was. Like I have a video with 10 clips and it's rejected immediately. Yeah. I can go and see which clip it was. It was the offending clip. And I can just eliminate it and repost. Yeah,
that's why especially with these interviews, I don't, like if I did I've done subsequent movie themed shows and I would have liked to have used clips from that, but I don't do it anymore because it's just, I have to be all original content. I don't have the time and effort myself. So let me just ask, you said you have this big library. On the event of your death, have you willed this maybe to like the Congress, the Library of Congress or something? Because I'm sure that there's probably a lot of stuff you have that would, very few people would have.
Well, maybe so. I haven't even thought about that. I know that my son is not that interested in my baby boomer 60s stuff. And my best friend has a larger collection than I do. And a lot of my stuff is computer files. And so, I don't know what would happen if but this stuff is available, everybody's got it.
Well, let me just dial back here a little bit to who you are and where you come from. Before we got this show rolling, you said you're 63. So you were born, if I remember one of your clips, like in late 54 then?
Yeah, October 54.
Yeah, and so you're going to be 60. So you're just about a decade older than me. I'm 53. Let me ask about your childhood then. Where were you born? What part of the U.S.?
I was born in South Carolina, and I still live there.
That's right, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so how about your parents? What kind of a background did they have?
They just working class people. I grew up, luckily, in the 50s and 60s, where the father worked. My father worked at the local state ports authority. He earned enough money back then. You paid enough money for the mother to stay home and take care of the kids. So when I came home from school, my mother was there. The meals were prepared. She played her role as the housewife. He played his role as a provider. And it was a great arrangement. And, maybe there was some dissatisfaction by some of the housewives, but it worked. And, when I got home, I didn't have to go to daycare. I didn't have to go to daycare in the summertime. My mom was home. And so it was to me, it was a great childhood. I had personal problems, but, and maybe that's why I look back at the 60s, because things like Star Trek and Marvel Comics and Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, they all gave me comfort during some kind of rocky times that I had. Yeah. And so that's why I continue to dwell on those things.
What are your first memories? Can you remember, say, the first television show that made an impact on you, the first movie, the first pop song?
Oh, well, when I was 4 or 5 years old, it was the big three. The Adventures of Superman, Popeye, the old black and white
Yeah.
theatrical cartoons,
Fleischer, yeah.
which are like the best cartoons ever made,
Yeah.
and then the Three Stooges.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, and I didn't watch Disney. I watched Looney Tunes because even at 4 and 5, I like things with an edge, a little bit, pushing the envelope a bit. I didn't like the family kiddie stuff. Didn't watch Captain Kangaroo much.
Mm-hmm.
I liked cool stuff like Superman. So those are my early memories.
How about a first movie that made an impression? Was it something like The Blob?
That's close. I mean, I went to the drive-in and saw The Blob, but it was on a re-release with Incredible Shrinking Man. So if you see those two on the same night, you're impressed. But I think probably the first movie that I saw, Valley of the Dragons. I don't know if you remember that, and Dinosaurus. Those were both
Dinosaurus,
early.
I remember, yeah.
But Gorgo,
oh yeah,
was huge, and I had the toy dinosaur, the plastic dinosaurs, and monsters have always been fascinating to me, and so Gorgo was cool.
So you also mentioned comic books. Were you a big comic collector?
I was. My first Marvel comic was a Fantastic Four, and I don't know if not everyone knows the difference between Marvel Comics and DC, but it was so far ahead of anything DC was doing.
Yeah.
It was because they were writing basically. I would say DC was writing for 8 to 10-year-olds. Marvel was writing for 12-year-olds to maybe even college age.
Yeah.
And they were so complex, and the characterization was there, and the pathos and all that stuff. Yeah. And I was just blown away by Marvel. And I bought Avengers 1 and X-Men 1 off the stands, and they were really, and Stan Lee, I mean, he has made such an impression on me.
Did you also read a lot, like science fiction? Like I know they had like Isaac Asimov's magazine in the 70s, but things like I forget the names of some of the big sci-fi mags. Were you no? I
did read those. I did read Famous Monsters of Filmland, which you're familiar with that. It's real kind of silly and a lot of puns and all, but you do get some facts from that. So I wasn't a big reader, but I did read Marvel comics. I read every issue. They were rags by the time I got through with them.
Were you an only child, by the way?
No, I have a brother and sister.
Okay. And were you the oldest or the youngest?
I'm the oldest.
Okay. Now, you said you grew up in, South Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
So you grew up then during the days of segregation. What was that like, just to give a cultural perspective? Were your family more liberal-minded or conservative?
They were not.
No.
It was segregation. It was my father, an honest, hardworking man, and he was a racist. Mm-hmm. And you didn't call him that. You didn't say that back then. But he said, basically, he believed that white people were better than black people. And I didn't have any. It was, since there was segregation, I had no proof of either way, except his word on that. And so we played in our neighborhood. I saw their neighborhood across, down the street, and they lived in shacks, and they didn't live well. And I didn't know what was up with that. Mm-hmm. Really, I didn't understand, all that stuff. I was, 9, 10. And, sometimes we would walk to the store past their neighborhood, and they would throw an occasional rock. And we would just either run away or throw a rock back. But it was total segregation, except for when the busing started, and they had one black child in our class. And even then I felt sorry for her, because she was totally isolated. No one to her. She had it rough.
Well, let me ask, what sort of music did you listen to? Because back then there was black music. Rock and roll was considered black music originally, correct?
Well, when I listened to Top 40, and so, it was rock and roll. And I didn't have anything against anything black. I just didn't know about it. Wasn't exposed to it. And when I got into high school, I finally met, because my high school was finally segregated when I got into the 9th grade. And I met and I saw black people. They were no different from me. They were guys. They were regular guys. And so that's when I started to pull out of that kind of, old thinking.
Mhm. Um, uh, you mentioned that you worked 42 years on a newspaper. Were you a reporter or?
I worked at the Post and Courier newspaper. It's the largest, it's the oldest daily newspaper in the South.
Uh-huh.
And I worked there for 42 years. I started as just in production. I was just hired on to help out.
Yeah, one of your videos shows you using like pasting up the
Yeah,
front
that's what I
pages
did.
or whatever.
And I did that for a couple of 3 years, and that's I can do better than that, I thought. So they had an opening for a TV columnist, and I applied for it, and I had to write some test columns, and I got the job, and I got moved up out of that production and into the newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote that TV column daily, starting at age 23, for 6 years. And then I became a copy editor. And then I was the paper's chief movie critic from 84 to 91.
Mm.
And then I was page designer. And I designed pages on the computer for many years. And I had a book published maybe 5 years ago on my marriage to a Chinese woman, a memoir, and I had that published. So that's pretty much my work history.
Well, let me then. You said about starting the channel. You had one channel that was pulled down. How many videos did you have on there before they pulled it down, and how long was it going?
It went for about 18 months, and it was ridiculous because I had like over 1,000 videos on it. I just had too many, and I posted too often, and I was bored. And and they weren't that good. It was such a mishmash of stuff. It didn't focus on anything, and it just wasn't. I didn't only had 1,100 subscribers at the end, and so actually it was a good thing that they pulled it. And so then I decided to focus more on my areas of interest and pop culture, and I was going to call it Boomer Pop, but I just kept the name Fredflix because it sounded good, and so that's what it is.
Well, I'm looking at your current site. It looks like the first one on the new Fredflix was Farrah Fawcett Tom Selleck commercial. Is that?
Yeah. I just wanted to get started somehow. I threw that on because I did, and I looked first to see if these things are on there already, and it wasn't on. So I just put that on, and that's not the typical thing I do, though. I don't usually just put on a commercial, or a movie, or I'll have an occasional TV show I'll put on, but that's maybe 5 or 6 videos are like that. I like to package things. I like to put best of this and worst of that, and do top 10 lists and I like to create.
Looking through it, starting out, it seems that you have a pretty broad scope. You have one on like the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, American International Pictures, and then you have some promos there. When you said that you wanted to put up your own interests, what is it that drives you to be interested in pop culture? You said that you try not to duplicate other people's stuff. Is it that you think you're filling a need?
What I do, first of all, is being retired especially, I just need something to do, and I like to make videos. And why would I make a video on, lizards in Ethiopia when I'm more interested in, the Beatles or whatever, except you can't put Beatles on there unless it's live or something. Yeah. So I just do things that I'm interested in that I remember from my childhood. Like you remember, I don't know if you ever heard of Ultraman. Yeah. Or the Sons of Hercules. These are things, they're obscure, but there's not a lot of stuff on the Sons of Hercules out there. So I made a little video about them. And so that interests me, and that's something I want to watch. So I hope that other people will want to watch it too.
I know I've watched probably a few dozen of your videos, probably even some on the old site. I don't think I've ever recalled you speaking in a video. You don't narrate them. Is that why not?
Well, number one, I'm not a good narrator. I don't think. But it's funny you should mention that I have a video upcoming where I do narrate.
Ah.
And it's on the 12 things that amazed me about the first Star Trek episode I ever saw, which I saw it in its first network run. But I did the narration, and I'm not that happy with it, so it'll probably just be a one-time thing.
How many videos do you have, by the way, like in the can or working on? Like now, are you finishing one video, have 2 or 3 in stages of development? How far out from the initial idea till you put it online does it take? 3 weeks?
Well, I've got 40 videos that I make them faster than I can post them. I don't want to post them daily because I think it's just too much. And when I post videos, I lose subscribers every time because people are going, "Hey, that's not what I signed up for. I don't Starman." So they unsubscribe. So I don't want to post every day, but I post maybe every third day, every other day. And I have 40 videos waiting in line. Because I don't know why I just keep getting these ideas, and when I get an idea, I can't sleep. I got to go and do it. And so, but if I have a video that, oh man, that's a good one, I put it up immediately. I don't put it in the back of the line. I put it up soon if it's really good.
I know you've gone back and forth. I'm just looking at one here, the Fredflix Awards, and you've got a photo of Jim Morrison as the little icon. Do you find, we talked about a little bit about the public domain kind of stuff, and you mentioned the Beatles just a minute or so ago. Is there a particular type of video that is the most troublesome or in terms of YouTube? And what other kinds of videos that you try to video and it just bombed? You said, I'm not going to do that again.
Well, you can't do any Beatles, and you can't do Star Trek. If I do like the 12 amazing things about Star Trek that I'm doing, I'm taking a chance that they're going to pull it. But if you just use still shots, you're fine. You can talk about Star Trek all you want. If you use still shots, Google images and stuff like that. But if you start putting the music on there and you start putting the regular clips, they can find it and pull it. But you can sometimes get by if you. It's hard if you're going to put a Star Trek video, not to mention the name Star Trek. So they're going to see it and they're going to probably pull it. But I'll just give it a shot, But like I try to do. One voice at the bottom of the sea. I just had one scene. It was less than a minute. I see these scenes everywhere, but I tried to do it, and it was pulled just because of that 1 minute scene. So you have to avoid that. Well, you find out soon enough what you can use. Elvis, of course. If you use live performance, you can use a live performance of the Beatles in some wherever because it's not. The song, the audio quality, it's not copyrighted the same. They're not looking for that. So there's a lot of live stuff I can use. But I avoid the stuff that I know is going to get me in trouble.
And how about, as I said, when you've done, for example, you did Sexy Babes of the 60s matchups, like a little playoff and whatnot. Did you get women saying, you're such a sexist pig and that kind of thing?
Did get some comments, and I did lose some subscribers, and you have to learn from stuff like that. So I actually stopped doing that. It's called Pick a Chick. It was a series, and I got a lot of great, comments from the guys. Hey, do more, But I could see that, and my audience is almost 20% female, which I'm happy about that, and I don't want to, I'm not one of these politically correct guys, but if you can see that the video is not helping the channel, there's no point in using it.
I mentioned, before I go on to some other of the videos that have pop cultural relevance, I mentioned that you had started doing a series of sort of day in the life kind of things. And I'm just starting from the beginning of the second channel here, and I actually see one that I didn't see before. There's one that says Fredflix presents being a kid in the 1960s, about 2 years ago, 17,000 or so views. Was that the first one that you did that was semi-autobiographical?
I wouldn't say it was one of my early videos, definitely, and I wouldn't call it semi-autobiographical. It's just that I lived in the '60s and I know what kids liked and I know what kids talked about. And no, I might not put stuff on there that I don't know anything about from the '60s because I don't know it.
Yeah.
But you know, it's just about the '60s, and I just have such fond memories of that period. And I just want to celebrate it in a way. Now, the day in the life, that's a different story. That is about me.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it isn't, because I don't talk about things like, this is a picture of my mother, and my mother did this and that, and my grandfather did this. I don't do that much. What I do is, in order for people to relate to it, they're not going to relate to something that my brother did, but they will relate to the products I use,
Mm-hmm.
the shows I watched, and the things I saw. And that's what I do. I'll say, we played with our Slinky.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care about if we played with it. I care about the Slinky.
Mm-hmm.
I want to evoke the memories of the Slinky and the Super Bowl. And so when I say, when I got to my friend's house, I don't care about whether I had a friend. I care about what we did. We used his BB gun. We played horseshoes. And those are the things that I want to get out there, so that people can remember their own times with the horseshoes and the slinkies.
What effect do the people who watch your channel have? Have people suggested videos for you to do, and have you done some?
Well, going back to the Day in the Life, that is my most popular series. I'm getting 10 times as many views on that. People like that. They want to see more of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of run out of, I don't usually, it's called a day in the life, but I tell people, I don't mind saying, it's really not a day in my life. I just take random memories and put it into one day, in order to create a coherent story.
Yeah.
And, because I don't remember what I did at 11:30 Saturday that day. It was just, I just remember that I did buy that Marvel comic. And so I put that Marvel comic in the video, and I say I bought it at this store. I do remember the store, but I don't remember the day.
Yeah.
So I just want to make an interesting, coherent package.
Yeah.
And I use artistic license, which I just got renewed, by the way. My artistic license is good for the next 10 years. That's a joke.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But as far as, I do have people suggesting ideas for videos all the time. And if I want to do it, I'll do it. If I don't want to do it, I don't make videos that I don't enjoy making.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just yesterday I was watching, there's an interview series done by like the Academy of Television Arts, the people who do the Emmys, and I was watching one of their most recent interviews with Jimmy Walker from Good Times, the guy who played JJ, and it was interesting because his mind, he's one of these people that remembers everything. He can say, oh yeah, back in '78, Richard Pryor and I were at this club and we played this and we met, this minor celebrity that you've already forgotten. Is your mind sort of like that? Do you have that ability to bring things and to the fore and say, oh, yes, I remember that TV show with Adrienne Barbeau, and she starred opposite so-and-so?
Well, I think, yes, I have a mind like that. Guys are good at trivia, and guys remember things that you shouldn't remember and that aren't important. I remember, I remember the first time I saw Jaws, the theater. I remember, in fact, every movie I've ever seen, I remember what theater I saw it in, probably. And I remember, like I said, when Star Trek premiered, I remember the first Lost in Space episode, its premiere, things like that. But I don't remember things I probably should remember, like when my sister was crying in her school. I don't remember that,
Is that because you identify more with the characters than with other people? I mean, were you a child? Do you think that you were lonely and you wanted to project yourself out of your circumstances?
Well, I wasn't lonely, but I was definitely. I always felt I was a bit of a misfit. So, and maybe the entertainment medium gave me comfort and helped me to escape. Probably that's probably what it was.
What part of South Carolina again was it that you were raised in?
I grew up in near Charleston, South
Okay,
Carolina.
so you
Still
were,
live near there.
so you were probably in the biggest city in the state then?
Charleston now is the biggest city in the state.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I know because I grew up in New York City a decade later than you, and there were quite a few television shows, television stations. How many television stations did you have growing up?
We had two until I was 7, almost 8, and they finally got a third. We didn't have the ABC, NBC affiliate.
Oh, okay.
No, we did that until 62.
Hmm.
So then I had 3 till PBS. So you don't have, there's not a lot of choices. So, and it's fact, that's what makes, when a TV show came on, it was important because it was, it was the only thing you had. You could go out and play, which of course I did. But, you don't have a lot of entertainment choices.
So you didn't have any independent television stations?
We didn't get an independent station until I was an adult.
Yeah. And what time do you remember what time that the stations would sign off? And for people who don't know, but TV wasn't always 24/7.
Yes, of course I sat there and watched the sign off, and even a little bit beyond.
Yeah.
And we had a late horror show that came on when the NBC affiliate started in 62. They started a creature feature type of monster movie show at 11 p.m. on Saturday, and that was called Out of This World, and it featured just low budget, indestructible man, amazing colossal man type of movies. And they would start at 11, and I remember them when they signed off, and I said, "Damn, I got to go to bed."
How about when you said you had a son? Was your son born in the 70s or 80s?
No, I have a lot of personal problems, personal demons that sort of made me be a late starter. So I didn't get married until I was 42.
Okay.
And I didn't have my son until I was 46, and he's 17.
Okay. So he's a millennial then, and so what do you notice differently about his child? And are you still in South Carolina, by the way?
Still in South Carolina.
What differences pop culturally do you notice?
It's huge. I would not want to be a child. I hate to say it, I would not want to grow up in this period. It's not just, and it's mainly because of the two parents having to work and the kid, having to do a lot of daycare, and a lot of structured play and a lot of structured stuff. We were totally unstructured. We were free hands. We walked out of the house, and the parents didn't know where we were until we came home for supper. But I want to know where my kid is every time. Everything's got to be organized. And he's growing up, of course, in the information age where nothing is special. It's all there. You can have it anytime you want. He doesn't, he's fine. He doesn't realize it. He's good with it. But it's just a different era that, of course, he's exposed to all this stuff that I don't want him exposed to. And I just don't even want to know what he's looking at, to tell you the truth.
I've had this running debate for a few years. I even did an interview about this a couple of years ago. I've always thought that the golden age of television really was basically from the late 60s to the late 70s, that 15 or so year period. Because when I've heard, like with cable television, I don't subscribe to cable, but I've seen shows on television, and when I've been at other people's places or when I worked and been on a break, I watched some stuff. I always say that the 70s were the best time because I'll give you an example. I mentioned this a couple of shows ago to someone that in 1972 on CBS, this was the Friday night lineup. All in the Family, MASH, Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, Carol Burnett. Now if you've got 400 or 500 channels, the population's only doubled. And so you've had such a thinning out of talent that I doubt you could get even one show of the quality of those 5. And you had 5 of them in a row for 3 hours on one night on one network. It's never going to happen again.
Right. It's well said. You had to be good to get on.
Yeah.
You had to be fantastic because there were only 3 networks. and there was lots of people waiting for those jobs, and they hired the best. But as far as that lineup you're talking about, now you were a child in that period. I was almost 20, 21, and I totally agree with you that those are great shows. But I got a better lineup for you.
Oh yeah.
I was a kid. Okay, Friday night, you start with the Green Hornet with Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Then you switch it at 8 to, switch the same channel, Time Tunnel. Or you can watch Wild Wild West. Mm-hmm. Then The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And then after that, The Sons of Hercules. And then also Tarzan was on. And, those kind of shows, they just have a certain, and that maybe because I was a kid, but they just have a certain charm and durability. Like, for example, All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, Carol Burnett, they're great. But I would be more likely to watch a Wild Wild West rerun than a Mary Tyler Moore rerun, even though I like them. Mm-hmm. But that's just me.
You have a number of videos that you've done about, bad pop culture, like space, Plan 9 from Outer Space and that kind of stuff. What is it about you that is attracted to those kinds of notably bad kind of movies? Were those the kind of things that you just could watch on that local show at 11:30 or whenever it was, and just enjoy it for the silliness it is?
Well, the nostalgia is part of it, but a movie can be bad, but it helps if it's also entertaining. If it's maybe so bad that you like Ed Wood, let's face it, he it's like a train wreck. You have to watch it.
Yeah.
But he did another movie called Bride of the Monster, which is very unwatchable. He just happened to hit the right bad notes when he did Plan 9.
Yeah. You also have a tribute to Mad Magazine. How important was that to you as a kid growing up?
Well, it was, a rite of passage, which I've said, and then magazines, kids read magazines and carried magazines and comics around. They were important. They were so influential. And, I don't think kids really read magazines today. I know my son has never bought a magazine. And he doesn't even watch DVDs or movies. He just goes on YouTube and watches clips, and of course he chats and he has a social networking thing going on, which I don't do. But the magazines were and then another thing is when you had the magazine, you could share it with the guy, and then you go to school, and we all talked about the same songs, the same programs, because everyone saw the same thing, especially Beatles and Sullivan, and everyone shared, the same thing.
To what extent, you said you started off with Marvel kind of comics. Did you get into, by the late 60s, early 70s, when you were getting out of high school, were you more into like some of the underground comics strips?
I wouldn't call it into it, but I did buy, Zap and Robert Crumb comics, and that was the pop culture at the time, and that's what I did buy those, but I didn't save them or didn't collect them or anything, because you can't let your mom find a Zap comic under your bed.
You said that you have done mostly 60s and 70s. As you go on, are you going to focus more on 80s and 90s stuff too, or is that because everyone has? Someone once said that the golden age in a person's life is always when they're between like 7 and 12.
Ooh, you hit it on the head. Yeah, 7 and 12. And I'll probably continue to focus on that because I don't really care about the 80s.
Yeah.
That wasn't a good decade for me personally anyway. And I noticed that the movies, the 70s was the last great period of American movie making. That you just cannot equal what was done in the 70s.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me then talk about, you mentioned your own personal life and whatnot. I know you did in some of the Day in a Life episodes, you did like your first day on the job. You did other things. You said you're sort of running out of ideas about that. What ideas for future series do you have? I mean, are you going, like you did one like What Was Flipper Really Thinking? And I think you did a couple of others like that. What do you have, like some upcoming series of videos?
Yes, I have. I can't even tell you because
Okay.
I don't want anybody to steal the ideas. But
Okay.
I have a lot of ideas and I have a lot of series coming. And the day in the life, I mean, I could fake it and try to make it like I remembered this and that, but I really don't want to fake that. So I used all the memories that I want to share. If I go to some other memories that are not as pleasant, it's not something that I really want to do, and I don't think people want to see that anyway.
You did a compilation of clips from William Shatner back mostly in the 60s and 70s, pre and I guess post Star Trek. Who are some of your favorite actors and actresses from that era? You mentioned shows like Green Hornet.
Bruce Lee. Yeah. Oh, wow. There's so many. Robert Culp comes to mind. Vincent Price. And then later on, I like Nick Nolte. Jack Nicholson has always been a favorite. And there's all the actors, even just the secondary ones. Stephen Boyd. You know, there just seemed to be an elegance, and they seem to be more men. You know, when I watch Brad Pitt, he's good, but to me, he's not the man Charlton Heston was.
Yeah.
They were really larger than life to me. And
yeah,
that's the difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even going back to the 80s, once you got these muscle guys like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, I look back at, like, say, 1968, the original Planet of the Apes, and you see Heston there. He seemed more realistic. I mean, he was obviously a big, strong guy, but he wasn't a cartoon figure, you know, with the rippling muscles and whatnot. Do you think that something changed? You mentioned about the 70s being sort of the last heyday of great American movies. Do you think something changed in the zeitgeist, and what do you think that was?
That's a good question. Something definitely changed. For one thing, the studios were making the films that are now like independent films today. The studios were taking chances. They were making 5 Easy Pieces, and they were making Death Wish. I just throwing that out there, but they were taking chances on subject matter. And now the studios don't seem to want to take those chances. They just want to make money. And they appeal to the least common denominator. And that's why TV has actually outpaced films, because the TV does take chances, and they do have these series that are remarkable. I admit that. That's one good thing about modern television. But there was a change. I think the main change was Jaws and Star Wars 75 and 77. Mm-hmm. That began the blockbuster mentality of the studios. And so they said, well, we got to make that money. We got to appeal to the masses. And that was part of the change. And I did like the movies of the 90s. I think some of the movies were better. But overall, I almost don't go to the movies anymore, because you can the independent films, they just come on Netflix and Amazon Prime. You can watch them there.
I did a show, I think about a year or so ago, about the death of Saturday morning cartoons. You would have been right about the age when the Saturday morning cartoons came about. My earliest memories are things like the Banana Splits and Josie and the Pussycats, that kind of thing. But you would have been of the earlier era with sort of Johnny Quest. I don't know if Rocky and Bullwinkle had migrated from primetime to Saturdays then. Do you remember fondly the Saturday morning lineups? And
yeah, it was a ritual. I mean, they don't have that. But kids, I don't know about kids today, but I know my kid does it. Saturday morning's not special to my kid. It never was, except he's off from school. But when you woke up, there was a lineup. There was Underdog. Space Ghost. I mean, you know the show.
Yeah.
And that's what you did. And you watched cartoons from probably, I woke up late. I woke up like at 9. So I watched cartoons from 9 to noon. And that was what you did. And then, as you know, I don't have to tell you, the violence, you know, protests and all totally changed the fabric of the Saturday morning cartoons. By the 1970s, they became more banana splits, family oriented, which if you grew up with that, I'm sure that's fine. But
and then by the 80s, they just became sort of commercials for He-Man and the Thundercats and the little Smurfs and all that stuff.
Yeah, and that's the way movies became too. So
I know
it was a special time.
Yeah, I know. I think something was lost in the sense that there isn't that community ritual, that water cooler thing, because everyone now can go on and they, you get these television shows, that are supposed hits on cable that have 2 million people watching. That sounds impressive until you realize we have like 330 million people in this country. So it's not, whereas someone could watch Johnny Quest and there might be 20 million people watching that out of 170.
Right. Yeah. And because it was only 3 shows on, if you watch TV that night and you were a kid, what are you going to watch? You're going to watch Johnny Quest, and you're going to go and you're going to talk about it with your friends the next day. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's all changed.
When you were at home during the summer breaks, did you stay up late and watch late night television like Johnny Carson and what's his name, Susskind and Dick Cavett? Or
I didn't start doing that until probably around 1970. I started watching Johnny Carson. And, of course, religiously, once you get started, you watch Johnny Carson. And then, of course, later on, you had Tom Schneider.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I'm a big devotee of Carson and those type of talk shows where they actually talked. It wasn't about, hey, I'm going to come out and entertain. We're going to talk.
Yeah.
Find out about this person.
How about game shows? That's another. I did a show about the history of game shows. 1960s, you would have had sort of the vintage era of things like Tell the Truth, What's My Line. Then later, Hollywood Squares came in the middle of that decade.
That's my favorite one.
Hollywood Squares.
Yeah. You did. They were prime time.
Yeah.
So it was To Tell the Truth. Definitely. I watched that. I didn't care too much about What's My Line, maybe because I didn't know who these people were. I was too young. Uh-huh. But I did watch the game show, Match Game, Password especially. Mm-hmm. And you watch them. What else are you going to do?
How about the variety shows? Variety shows have basically been dead for 30 or more years. I think Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters was the last one that I can recall into the mid-'80s. But you had, Ed Sullivan, and you had Laugh-In, and you had the Smothers Brothers for 2 or 3 years and whatnot. Were you, by that time, you would have been entering your teens. Was it interesting to watch The Doors or the Jefferson Airplane on TV?
Oh, look, Red Skelton.
Yeah.
What were some of the other ones?
Dean Martin, I know, had a show for a while.
Dean Martin, every week.
His roasts.
Red Skelton, and there were a lot of them. And, and you got to see The Doors, and you got to see all these people. And, I was a little late to the sophisticated rock and roll scene. So when you did have people on there like Janis Joplin and maybe Jimi Hendrix, I wasn't really into them at the time. And I would probably be more interested in the Monkees. Mm-hmm. I hate to say it. And that's another show. The Monkees. I remember thinking when I was like 11 that if the Monkees is ever canceled, I'll just kill myself. Because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
But I was, again, trying to, Dean Martin. And Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
Every Saturday night. And then that was the time when the whole family watched the same show. Most of the time because you got one television set. And, of course, I'm watching black and white until 1967.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. My family, we didn't get color TV till 86, in fact.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, my dad didn't want it. He thought it was wasteful and whatnot. And when I was 21, I bought one, a little set for myself that was color. But uh, let me just ask about some sort of like hidden things for you. And I'll give this little brief anecdote. About a year or so ago, when I was writing a play, I was one night I came home from work and I just looked online and I found the second Lucille Ball show after I Love Lucy and before Here's Lucy was just, I think, the Lucy Show, they called it. And I hadn't seen this for 50 years because I think by the time I was actually born and 3 or 4 years old, the first season I remember reruns, and she had a daughter played by an actress named Candy Moore. I remember having the biggest crush when I was 3 or 4 years old, but it was reruns from '62 or '63, a few years before I was born. And I hadn't thought of this actress, Candy Moore, who apparently the only claim to fame she had after the Lucy Show is she's apparently the model on the Cars LP called Candy O, if the rock group, the Cars from the '70s. But
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
yeah. Is there any actress, let's say, that even as a boy you had a crush on or whatnot? And like if you could be stranded on a desert island, who would be that actress that you'd want? Would it be Raquel Welch or what?
Well, she was ubiquitous in the
Yeah.
'60s, so that's probably the first name you would go to. But I remember there were some women that came up that I would say, "Wow, that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And
Yeah.
then later on, you realize she wasn't.
Yeah.
But uh, Raquel Welch was, and Joey Heatherton
Uh-huh.
when she. And I'll tell you another one. The Jeannie C. Riley, who did Harper Valley PTA.
Yeah.
Remember that song?
Yeah.
And there were several that. And then when you go to the movies and you first see Faye Dunaway, I mean, wow, Bonnie and Clyde. So yeah, there were a lot.
Another thing that I see quite often on some of your clips are news clips. What impact, as you were growing up, did things like the JFK assassination, the Vietnam War, the moon landing, and then I guess towards the end of your childhood, Watergate, uh, how big pop cultural events were they to you?
Well, the Kennedy, I just did a video on Day in the Life
Yeah.
when Kennedy was killed, and just maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was huge, and it's stunning. You watch parents crying and adults, teachers crying.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen that before,
Yeah.
and something's, that it's bad, but you don't know the ramifications of it. You just watch and you go, "Oh, he's dead." And, wow. And then you go out and, an hour later, you go out and play. And then you think about it, but it doesn't really affect your life that much when you're 9. Mm-hmm. Other than the fact that I think back and I wish I would have been older where I could really, for that to soak in, that moment. And I missed the Jack Ruby. I wasn't watching TV when that happened.
Yeah.
And then you had Vietnam coming up, and you start seeing them doing the lotteries on the draft, and I'm like 13, 14, thinking, hey, that's going to be me in a few years. And it was kind of scary, and the Cold War always scared me. I was reading things like where to go if the bomb drops, what shelter do you go to, and if you live here, you cannot go to this shelter. You have to go to the other shelter further away. And I'm thinking, well, what? Maybe they'll let me in, And you do, and I did worry about that. And the moon landing was something from the beginning with the first launches. Mm-hmm. I'm totally into it, and I'm anticipating this, and I know that it's huge. And by the time it happened, I was like 15. I could soak it in, and I went and actually saw Apollo 16, I believe it was, lift off at Cape Kennedy in '72 on a school field trip. Mm. And that's the most unbelievable thing I'd ever seen. Mm. And so I was hugely into it. And of course, when they landed on the moon, my parents went to bed. I mean, who goes to bed when they're going to walk on the moon in an hour or two?
Yeah.
What's I was there, I was glued, watching it. Then you mentioned Watergate and all that stuff, but I know I had to get into college because I had to, that's one way to avoid the draft, because I'm not an Army type of guy. So that made sure I get into college, and Watergate was, amazing to watch that unfold. So,
one of the things with pop culture now versus 4 or 5 decades ago is because of the internet, it seems that while people have more choices, there is less of a real community, a sense of community. You have a lot of conspiracy people who just, will rip on something. You have trolls that will, just attack people. And I mentioned the interview that I had watched the other day with Jimmy Walker, the comedian from Good Times, and he had an interesting comment at the end of his video. He said, you can't silence people in this country. We have freedom of speech. But he said that one of the things he thinks that is a problem is that maybe not everyone should be listened to, in that you have a lot of people who have these kooky conspiracies. If Kennedy, when Kennedy was killed, if we had the internet then, you'd have, lots of people blogging, yes, he deserved to do it, and they'd be showing, the video clips of him dying and dancing on his grave. Do you think that there's too much of a harshness, too much of not enough, like I mentioned the water cooler thing, that people now are too segregated into their own little niches?
You pretty much said it. That's what they are. There was more of a politeness back then,
Mhm.
and because the bar had not been lowered yet, it's you got the bar is so low now that you can almost get away with anything. You just didn't do those type of things back then. But then again, you didn't segregate people back then either.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not a perfect time.
Yeah.
I always say, yeah, the 50s, 60s were great if you were white middle class.
Yeah.
Male.
Yeah.
I had all the advantages.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was the way life was supposed to be for everyone. But of course, it wasn't. And those were that's the sad part about that era.
Yeah. Let's just wrap this up, and I will link to Fredflix, the YouTube channel, below this video. Unfortunately, YouTube 9 times out of 10, it's not youtube.com/Fredflix, but I will link to it below for anyone to check out your channel. Let me just ask you then, what do you see as the future of your channel? You said you have 40 or so videos in the can, and you said you didn't want to mention some of the ideas you have, but is there like a big video that you could mention that in the next 2 or 3 weeks you're going to put up,
Sure. If you give me 1 second, I'll get the list.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on.
And as we wait for Fred to return, if you do just Google Fredflix, you will get there's a website and there's also a YouTube channel. But Fredflix, Fred Smith said that the Fredflix website is not his. So anything with Fredflix in Amsterdam is not Fred's site.
No.
It's just a similarly titled thing. But Fredflix at YouTube is what I'll be linking to. But go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, I've got a lot of things I like to, with my new software, I'm playing around with audio and video.
Uh-huh.
So I'm showing like a bunch of reverse action things, like a barroom brawl in Wild Wild West. I reverse it, and I have a new series coming called Paper Prism, where I look at the old magazines, because magazines used to matter. And I look at the old magazines, the pulp magazines, and TV Guide, and Famous Monsters. Look at those. I've got a series called Hey, That's Fake, where I don't know if you saw this, but I have Johnny Carson interviewing Beyonce.
Yeah, I saw that one, yeah.
And I've got Ed Sullivan introducing Taylor Swift. And got Ted Koppel. He interviewed Tammy Faye and Jim Baker. I got him interviewing the Muppets. So, midnight movies. I don't know if you remember how big midnight movies were back in the 70s.
Yeah.
You go to the movie, and they would have only showing that one day, that one time at midnight, they would have these movies. And I've got bad top 10 lists, bad, like best special effects, but it's a bad list. So they're the worst special effects.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got a lot of stuff coming up.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone enjoys it and watches.
And you mentioned your video. I think you mentioned one of the popular ones. What is your most popular video in terms of views?
Well, I've got Dean Martin was a guest on Johnny Carson in the maybe early 70s, mid 70s. I just thought it was a funny interview because he was wasted. Yeah. But I don't think he really was, because you couldn't do what he does with really being drunk. You would just be stupid. Yeah. So that's probably my most popular video. But the most popular video that I've made are shows that would be politically incorrect. Yeah. Or not shows that just, what were they thinking when they put that show on? Yeah. And I do mention the Gong Show, but people read comments say, wait a minute, the Gong Show is a great show. Yeah. But I do ask, what were they thinking when they put on that show? And David Cassidy, Man Undercover.
Yeah, I saw that one, yeah.
You know, I do stuff like that. And then those are very popular.
Yeah. Well, again, I will link to your YouTube channel below here. I want to thank you for spending an hour speaking about it, and continued success in the future.
Well, Dan, you're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
You come prepared, you know your stuff, and you listen. That's the biggest thing. And this is not about you. So I thank you. You're very good.